Clara glanced at her reflection in the kitchen window, the faint hum of the dishwasher filling the quiet space. She should have been excited. Ethan was arriving any minute now, but a strange, nervous energy sat heavy in her chest. It had been years since she last saw him. The boy she remembered was now a grown man, and from what she had seen in family photos, he had changed. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, suitcase in one hand, a casual grin on his face. "Aunt Clara," he said warmly, pulling her into a hug. His voice was deeper than she remembered, his presence more confident. "Ethan, you've grown so much," she said, stepping back to take a better look at him.
He laughed.
"Well, 10 years will do that to you." Daniel appeared in the hallway, nodding toward Ethan with a polite smile. "Good to see you, kid. Hope you're ready for the internship grind." Ethan chuckled, looking forward to it. The evening passed in pleasant conversation. Clara watched as Ethan and Daniel talked about work, sports, and the city, but she couldn't ignore the way Ethan's eyes occasionally drifted toward her. She dismissed it as nothing, familiarity, comfort. He was family after all. Later that night, as Clara finished cleaning the kitchen, Ethan walked in, stretching his arms. "Thanks for letting me stay," he said, leaning against the counter. "Of course. We're happy to have you." He hesitated. "How have you been?" "Really?" Something in his voice made her pause. When was the last time someone had asked her that? Not in passing, not out of obligation, but with real curiosity. She forced a small smile. "Life is steady." Steady sounds like another word for boring, he teased, but his gaze searched hers for something deeper. She laughed, brushing him off. "It means predictable, which isn't always a bad thing." He nodded, but the look in his eyes lingered.
"I guess."
"But predictability can feel like being stuck, too." Clara swallowed, suddenly feeling exposed. "You should get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Ethan held her gaze for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, you're right. Good night, Aunt Clara." She watched him leave, her heart beating just a little too fast. Clara woke earlier than usual, the house still quiet. She moved through her morning routine, but something felt different, like a shift in the air she couldn't explain. As she poured coffee, Ethan walked in, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning. Coffee?" "Yeah. Thanks." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "Slept okay?" She nodded, but it wasn't true. Sleep had been restless, her thoughts tangled in things she had no business thinking about. She handed him the mug, their fingers brushing briefly. Neither of them pulled away immediately. "Thanks," he murmured, eyes lingering on hers a second too long. Clara turned quickly, forcing a light tone. "So, how's the internship so far?"
"It's fine," he said.
"But honestly, the best part about being here is getting to know you again." She exhaled a quiet laugh. "I haven't changed much." "I don't believe that," he said softly. The conversation hung between them, unspoken things pressing against the edges. Clara glanced at the clock. "I should get started on work." Ethan nodded but didn't move right away. "I like talking to you." Her stomach twisted. "You should go enjoy the city. You're only here for a while." He studied her before nodding.
"Yeah.
Maybe later." As the days passed, their interactions grew heavier with something unsaid. A stolen glance over dinner. A quiet moment in the living room, sitting too close. A brief touch that neither acknowledged. Clara told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things. One evening, Daniel called to say he'd be gone for a week. Work emergency. Clara told herself she felt relief because she'd have some quiet time, not because it meant more time alone with Ethan. That night, she and Ethan sat on the porch. A summer storm was rolling in, the air thick with electricity. He exhaled, tilting his head toward the sky. "I always like storms," he said. "Me too," she admitted. He turned to her. "Are you happy, Clara?" The question cut through her like a blade. She should have shut it down, laughed it off. Instead, she hesitated. "I have a good life." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him, then really looked. He wasn't the boy she remembered. There was something steady in the way he watched her, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. "You should go inside," she whispered. He didn't move at first. But then, after a long pause, he nodded. "Good night, Clara." She let out a breath only after he was gone, her hands gripping the chair arms, heart racing against every warning in her head. The storm arrived in the middle of the night, shaking the windows with heavy rain and rolling thunder. Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She told herself it was just the weather keeping her up, not the thought of Ethan down the hall. A sudden crack of thunder rattled the house. A soft knock followed. She hesitated before getting up and opening the door. Ethan stood there, his face shadowed in the dim hallway light.
"Power's out," he said.
She nodded.
"Yeah."
Neither moved. The air between them was thick, charged. Another flash of lightning illuminated his face, uncertain, conflicted, but something else, too. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Not really." His gaze dipped for a second, then back to hers. "Neither could you?" She should have stepped back, should have closed the door. Instead, she stood there, waiting for something she couldn't name. "Clara." His voice was low, careful, but filled with something she wasn't ready to face. She swallowed. "This is a bad idea." "I know," but he didn't move away. Everything in her screamed to stop this before it started, but the moment had already slipped beyond control. His fingers brushed against hers, tentative, waiting for her to pull away. She didn't. The first touch was hesitant, testing the weight of the moment. Then something shifted, restraint unraveling. His hand found her wrist, sliding up her arm, slow, deliberate. A quiet gasp escaped her lips, shock, guilt, desire all colliding in the same breath. Reality hit hard. She pulled away sharply, stepping back as if burned. "This can't happen," she said, voice shaking. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face. "I know," he repeated, but this time it sounded like regret. Her heart pounded, the consequences of the last few seconds crashing over her. "Go back to bed, Ethan." For a moment, he didn't move, as if waiting for her to take it back. But she wouldn't. She couldn't. Without another word, he turned and walked away. She closed the door, pressing her back against it, eyes squeezed shut. The storm raged on outside, but inside, everything had already changed. Clara avoided Ethan the next morning. She busied herself in the kitchen, pretending nothing had happened, pretending last night was nothing more than a lapse in judgment. But she felt his presence before she saw him, lingering in the doorway. "Clara," he started, but she cut him off. "We don't need to talk about it." He hesitated. "You sure about that?" She turned, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Yes." His jaw tightened, frustration flickering in his eyes. "So, that's it? We pretend it nev."